And speaking of secrets, what is on Vladimir Putin's mind? Will the conflict in Ukraine spill over? We've been asking this question since the war began last year, and we have good reason to keep asking it. Europe is living in fear. The Wagner forces are in Belarus. Today they began fresh drills. Do you know where? Wagner drills are happening near the border with Poland and Lithuania. So leaders of both these countries are worried. They've increased border security and they say they're bracing for more Russian provocations. So is a fresh escalation on the cards? Our next report explores.
When the Wagner forces left Russia for Belarus, many thought it was a retirement posting, but it wasn't. Far from being irrelevant, these Russian mercenaries are creating new security challenges for the region. The new provocation are drills near Poland and Lithuania. The exercise began on Monday. They're happening here in the Grodno region of Belarus. The Polish-Lithuanian border falls next to it. The Wagner forces showed up with some serious firepower. They're training with military drones, tanks and motorized rifle units. The defense forces of Belarus are participating too. Minsk says the Wagner forces are sharing their learnings from the war in Ukraine. But why train so close to NATO's borders? The reason could be this is a sparsely populated stretch of land. It's called the Suwalki Gap. It's Polish territory and NATO's biggest vulnerability. Military experts say Russia could exploit it. This area runs along the border where Wagner troops are conducting drills. It links at least 3 Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. There are fears that Russia might try to seize the Suwalki Gap, turn it into a potential flashpoint, and cut off 3 Baltic states from Poland and other NATO members. Warsaw recognizes the risk. Today, the Polish Prime Minister visited the Suwalki Gap. He was accompanied by the Lithuanian President. Poland feels Wagner wants to destabilize NATO's eastern flank.
This is what provocation is about. This is what intrigue and plotting on the part of Putin and Lukashenko is about. And this is what the operational activities on their side are about. In order to destabilize, in order to create unrest, chaos, uncertainty, and at the same time, to show the weakness of NATO's eastern flank to all of our partners in NATO.
Putin's loyal ally Lukashenko doesn't feel that way. He believes the drills are a necessity to secure Belarus and to keep Western powers in check. Last week, he mocked Warsaw.
I heard recently that Poland went berserk. It alleged that some detachment is coming here with as many as 100 people. No Wagner detachments of 100 people moved here. And if they did, it was to only transfer their military experience to Belarusian brigades concentrated in Brest and Grodno.
Lukashenko was referring to the latest Polish developments. Poland has rushed more troops to its eastern borders. This was after a chopper incident. Last week, Warsaw claimed Belarus sent military helicopters to its airspace. Minsk denied the allegation. There are growing concerns the situation might escalate. Already, the war in Ukraine is intensifying. Today, 2 Russian missiles hit the eastern city of Pokrovsk. The target was a residential complex. The missiles completely destroyed the buildings and there were multiple casualties. Putin seems to be bracing for a serious escalation. Reports say he's beefing up the Russian National Guard. They'll be equipped with heavy weaponry like artillery and attack helicopters. Is he preparing for a wider conflict? Only the Russian president knows the answer.
The Chinese economy is sick. Everything that can go wrong is going wrong. Growth has slumped, millions are unemployed, investment is sluggish, and local governments are saddled with debt. These are symptoms of a chronic disease. Experts have a name for it. They're calling it an economic long COVID. An economic long COVID. It's a telling assessment. And our lead story tonight, we start with the latest data on trade. China's exports have dropped. It's the biggest drop in 3 years. Exports have fallen by 14.5% compared to the numbers from July 2022. And this is extremely worrying for Beijing because exports are the growth drivers of China. Exports propel their economy. They made China an economic powerhouse, and now they have slumped. What's worse, this is not a one-off. In the past 3 months, China's exports have steadily declined. In the past 7 months, exports have dropped by 5%. Why do you think that's happening? Why are China's exports shrinking? The world wants to decouple with China. They want to reduce dependence on China. But this drop in exports is not because of that. It has nothing to do with decoupling. The problem here is more fundamental in nature. There is a serious drop in demand. The global economy is slowing down. The cost of living is rising. High inflation is hurting everyone. So the general approach is to save money. People all over the world are buying less. And that means fewer orders for Chinese factories. For 4 straight months now, factory activity has been shrinking in China. The workers have fewer orders to process. Factories are churning out fewer goods. China's biggest buyers are placing smaller orders. The United States, for instance, it is a big market for China. But Chinese exports to America fell by more than 23% this year. The European Union is another major buyer. Their orders to China fell by over 20%. And this is the general trajectory. And it's throwing Beijing off balance. 2023 was supposed to be the year of recovery for them. And China was banking on exports to drive this recovery, but that's not happening anymore. And that's not the only problem. There is another vulnerability. China's import orders are also falling. Let me take you back to the latest trade data. There is a fall of more than 12% in imports. A 12% fall in imports. Why is this important? Because import numbers are a reflection of China's economic health. They reveal the inside story. They show the level of consumer demand. Are people in China spending money? These numbers show they're not. A fall in imports signals a dip in spending. Beijing knows that. In the month of July, they introduced a new plan. It was supposed to boost spending. Local officials were asked to reach out to the masses and do what? Encourage residents to refurbish their homes. They had plans to provide better credit facilities. This was supposed to boost spending in household items. But it hasn't really helped. People are not spending as much money as the state would like them to. They're keeping their savings in banks. Look at some numbers from the month of January. This is an assessment on Chinese banks on their liquidity. How much cash do they have in deposits? Trillions of dollars. Deposits were higher than loans. The gap between loans and deposits was at its highest since 1997. And this is a telling statistic. It reveals 2 things. One, the people are worried. They're keeping their savings in banks. They feel they'll have to dip into those savings at some point. The second takeaway is about the banks themselves. They have large deposits. They would like to give out loans to people, but people don't want to take any more loans. Chinese households already have a high level of debt. They're already heavily indebted. By June, they owed more than $5 trillion in debt. This was in the form of mortgage loans, consumer goods loans, credit card debt, private borrowings, business loans. $5 trillion. So households don't have the appetite for more debt, and that's bad business for banks. What is Beijing doing about these issues? They're re-educating their bankers, not in economics or banking, but in the Xi Jinping thought. You heard that right? Instead of fixing this economic mess, Chinese officials are hosting lectures. They're teaching bankers about the Xi Jinping thought. And what is that? It's a set of policies and ideas espoused by the Chinese president. In 2018, these were added to the Chinese constitution. So bankers are being lectured on ideology, on how to be loyal to the Communist Party and to the president. What they need right now is policy intervention, not propaganda. 2 engines of their economy have failed. Exports are down, imports have fallen. Throwing the red book at this problem will not help. When I say Andaman and Nicobar Islands, what comes to mind? If you're an Indian, I can guess. A remote chain of islands, beautiful beaches, maybe even water sports. But what about marine warfare? Just last week, a Japanese destroyer visited Port Blair. That's the capital of Andaman and Nicobar. The military leaders held talks. The sailors, meanwhile, had a nice time of football and some yoga. Last month, another warship was in town, the French frigate Lorraine. The vessel made a port call at Port Blair, which begs the question, why the sudden interest in Andaman and Nicobar? To understand that, we must look at the geography. Andaman and Nicobar is an archipelago. It has 572 islands. The northernmost is close to Myanmar. The southernmost is close to Indonesia. It straddles two important oceans, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. It is also close to a very important choke point, the Malacca Strait. This strip of water between Malaysia and Indonesia, this is the Malacca Strait. And why is it important? Because ships heading to China pass through here. Most of them carry oil. Around 80% of China's oil imports go via Malacca. You strangle Malacca, you strangle China. That's how it works. Which is why Andaman and Nicobar is so important. It is almost 1,200 kilometers away from mainland India, but that distance is the biggest advantage. From Andaman, you can keep tabs on Malacca. You can project military power. You can also run supply and reconnaissance missions. So the strategic value is huge. Why then did India never use it? Because it was never really necessary. China's Indian Ocean ambitions emerged in the last decade. They began sending fishing boats, patrols and submarines. In 2016, China built a military base in Djibouti. That's on the other side of the Indian Ocean, in the Horn of Africa. The next year, in 2017, they got the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. Suddenly, China was all around us. That's when New Delhi began realizing the potential of Andaman and Nicobar. So what are they doing about it? The first priority is to improve the infrastructure. The Navy has an air station on this island called Campbell Bay. It has a 3,500 feet long runway. It is now being upgraded to 10,000 feet. You can't operate bigger planes without long runways. In January, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh was at this air station. He reviewed the upgrade progress. A second runway is also being built, another 10,000 feet one in the southern islands. These new runways will be crucial to hosting military planes. In 2020, a US aircraft landed there for refueling, a surveillance plane called P-8 Poseidon. It was the first such mission on Andaman and Nicobar. Some Indian assets are also deployed there, like the Sukhoi fighter jets and the Jaguar planes. In many ways, Andaman is perfect for the job. It is the only place in India with a joint command. And what does that mean? All three services of Indian military operate under a single leadership there. The Army, the Navy, the Air Force. All these assets report to a single command. In the mainland, that's not the case. Each service reports to its own leadership. Experts say joint commands are better in the long run. There is more synergy, more clarity. Andaman and Nicobar already has that. This year, a major joint military exercise was held there. It involved the Army, the Navy, the Air Force and the Coast Guard. So the thought process is right, and it's not just military investments. Civilian infrastructure is also getting a boost. The government says it has invested 30,000 crore rupees in the last decade in Andaman and Nicobar. The plan is to invest another 10,000 crores. A transshipment hub, an international airport, a solar power plant are all in the works. Other countries are also investing, by the way. Japan, for example, is funding a power project. Quick side note. Tokyo actually captured Andaman and Nicobar in 1942. This was during the Second World War. They realized the strategic importance even then, 1942. Almost 80 years later, the world is also realizing the same thing. They're calling Andaman and Nicobar an unsinkable carrier, a formidable outpost to counter China. But words alone are not enough. The islands need major military upgrades to serve such a purpose. More military assets, more surveillance tech, more infrastructure. If not, it's a waste of strategic value. Something strange happened last week. The United Nations Security Council held a special meeting. It wasn't about Russia's war. It wasn't about the coup in Niger. It wasn't about any conflict. This meeting was about food security. Now, when the Security Council discusses food, you know it's a big problem. Just how big? Let me tell you. Around 780 million people in the world are hungry. 780 million are hungry. That's 1 in 10 people. They don't know where the next meal is coming from. Around 345 million people are facing acute hunger, that's borderline starvation. This number has doubled since 2020. And of these people, around 49 million are on the brink of famine. These are unprecedented levels. The World Food Programme was set up in 1963. Since then, global hunger has never been this high. So why now? Well, one reason is the population. When overall population rises, so does the hungry population. But that alone is not causing this. Two man-made problems are fueling this crisis: conflict and climate change. Around 70% of the hungry population lives in regions affected by war, places like Yemen, Congo, Chad, Niger. It's a fact of life. Where there is war, there is hunger. And the war in Ukraine is making things worse. Ukraine makes up around 10% of global wheat exports, plus around 15% of corn exports. Most of this went to the developing world, but it's not going there anymore. Last month, Russia withdrew from the Black Sea grain deal. They've stopped Ukraine from exporting food, and this is the result: a resurgent food crisis. Wheat prices are up nearly 10%. Millions of tons of wheat are stuck in Ukraine. Think about how absurd that is. 780 million people are hungry, yet wheat is just rotting away because of war. That's one problem. The second cause is climate change. 2023 has seen some of the worst heat waves. Last month, July, was the hottest on record. This erratic weather is affecting output. Wheat yield is expected to fall around 20% in the next 2 decades and around 40% by 2080. So our population is rising, but our food production is falling. Obviously, that is bad news. These two factors have forced countries to take drastic calls. India, for example, we've banned the export of two important grains, wheat and non-basmati white rice. Both decisions were crucial. India makes up around 40%, 40% of global rice exports. That's around 22 million tons. A big chunk of that is non-basmati white rice. Imagine that supply disappearing overnight. The effects are already visible. Rice prices are up almost 20% compared to January. It's the highest level since 2011. So here's the bottom line. Climate change is reducing our output. War is affecting our supply lines. If you add these two, what do you get? A global food crisis, that's what you get. If you produce food, you can escape this somehow. Like India or the United States. You can control your exports and keep more to yourself. But that's a luxury. More than 130 countries are net importers of food, meaning they buy more than they sell. These countries are at the mercy of global factors. When Russia pulls out of the grain deal, these countries are helpless. Same when India bans rice exports, or when Ukrainian grain depots are destroyed. And don't think this is temporary. The effects of today's hunger will be felt forever through malnutrition, through stunted growth, through reduced immunity. So the solution cannot be slow or delayed. It must come now. And how will that happen? In an ideal world, Putin will have a change of heart. World leaders will pump trillions into climate action. But let's face it, neither is going to happen. Going forward, climate change will be the biggest villain. Just look at what's happening in China. There are devastating floods in the country's northeast. This region is often called China's granary, but right now it is underwater. Thousands of hectares of crops have been destroyed. The wheat harvest is down 1%. It is the first time in 7 years that China's summer output is down, and this is really bad news. China is the world's largest producer of rice and wheat, but all of it is consumed at home. In fact, even the local production is not enough. China ends up importing food anyway. It is a net importer of food items. The good news is Beijing has the means. They have the money to buy food from abroad, but many countries in Africa and Asia do not have that luxury. They don't just need food, they need affordable food. It's one area where the world is going backwards. We actually made some great progress in the last 50 years. In 1970, around 33% of people in developing countries were hungry. By 2015, this number was down to 12%, from 33 to 12%. How did we achieve that? Through consistent investment. But those gains have been eroded in the last 3 years. Global hunger has risen 119%, 119% since the pandemic. How do we correct this? By investing more money. In this case, throwing money at the problem is important. Whether it's climate action or buying food grains or investing in new technology, we need that money. We're not investing enough money. Last year, the United Nations raised around $14 billion to feed the hungry. It was an all-time record, 14 million. But guess how much the target was? 40 billion. 40. I know it's a lot, but if governments want to, they can spare this money. If you take out 5% of America's military budget, you can end hunger for 1 year. Just 5%. Also, oil companies, they made $100 billion in profits in the first quarter of 2023. That's $100 billion in 3 months. So don't think money is not available. It's all about priorities. And before I begin my last story, let me ask you, have you ever gotten food poisoning? What about a skin infection or bacterial pneumonia? And trust me, this is not an uncomfortable doctor's appointment. I'm simply mentioning commonly occurring bacterial infections. Chances are you've caught one at least once in your life. And what happened next? If a standard drill was followed, doctors probably prescribed antibiotics. After all, antibiotics are life-saving drugs. But what if I told you soon these drugs could stop working? They won't help. Some doctors say it's almost inevitable. And there's a surprising reason why. It's the air you breathe. Polluted air is raising antibiotic resistance among people, no matter their age, no matter where they live. A new global study is out. It recorded data from 166 countries. It says antibiotics are under threat due to air pollution across the world. More germs, like bacteria, are winning the fight. They're defeating the medicines designed to kill them. So antibiotic resistance is on the rise, meaning a wide range of new problems. Infections could go untreated. Even minor injuries could become life-threatening. Many surgeries will not happen because antibiotics may not be able to prevent later infections. The quality of air has always been linked to antibiotic resistance, in fact. It wasn't a cause for alarm, though. People usually resist antibiotics due to misuse or overuse. But now air pollution is getting worse, thanks to road traffic, industrial fumes, coal, wood burning, you name it. So the link between antibiotic resistance and poor air is growing stronger. With every 10% rise in air pollution, antibiotic resistance grows by 1%. It doesn't sound like much, but it is a big problem. It's one of the fastest growing threats to global health. It already affects 7 billion people. It kills more than 1 million people every year. They don't respond to antibiotics, 1 million people every year. If the air quality does not improve by 2050, about 10 million people will die annually. And apart from the human cost, there's going to be an economic cost. Costs could rise sharply, prices would rise sharply due to antibiotic-resistant infections. More and more people would live with untreated infections, and this will hurt poorer nations more. North Africa, West and South Asia face the biggest threats. And this is over and above the harm that toxic air is already causing.
You feel like you're choking when you take the face mask off. Something bad feels in the air.
The air quality has significantly deteriorated in last several years. I wish as few children as possible would use inhalers. I have been using one for years now, and each time I come to Serbia, my condition gets even worse.
Air pollution is the single largest environmental risk to public health. Again, some have it worse off than others. The Indian capital of Delhi is the most polluted city in the world. Living here reduces your lifespan by 10 years. Some other most polluted cities are in Nigeria, Peru, Bangladesh, Indonesia and Pakistan. But air pollution is a worldwide problem. For every 1,000 people alive on earth, 973 are regularly inhaling toxins. The science and evidence are clear. Air pollution causes heart disease, asthma, lung cancer, even disability and death. And it can be very harmful even for babies. Look at this data. Pollution causes premature birth of 6 million babies every year. It leads to 3 million underweight babies and 1 million stillbirths. Also the death of 500,000 newborns. The numbers are devastating. This is what toxic air is doing to our world. It harms us, the babies that are not even born yet. And now it is rendering our medicines useless. It is the breath of death. It follows us everywhere we go. There is no hiding. So about time we stopped running and try to tackle this problem. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. The Indian Space Research Organisation, or ISRO, has released images of the moon captured by Chandrayaan-3. In Australia, a space object lit up the sky above Melbourne. The Australian Space Agency said it is a remnant of a Russian Soyuz 2 rocket re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And people usually keep dogs to chase away burglars. But what happens when the dog is irresistibly cute? A burglar in the United States faced a similar situation. He paused the burglary to sneak in a cuddle session. You have to see what happened next. And finally, what makes the 8th of August significant? On this day in 1942, the father of India, Mahatma Gandhi, launched the Quit India movement. It was a civil disobedience movement aimed to end the British rule in India. The British resorted to violent means to thwart this movement, but it initiated widespread acts of non-cooperation. We leave you with that. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Because you're so cool. Come here. Because you're the coolest dog I've ever known. I love you too. You're a sweetheart. I want you to come home with me. I'm ready.